Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 185 of the Dynasty Junkies podcast, a proud member of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network, or the DAP Network, if you will. I'm trying to, if you're watching us live on YouTube or on my Twitter, because it's not on the Junkies Twitter anymore, but if you're watching us live on YouTube or Twitter, feel free to comment, say DAP Network. We'll get you in the stream. Thank you so much for joining us if you're watching us live. If you're not watching us live, I understand. You know, podcasts are meant to be listened with your ear holes later on. So thank you for listening to that too. And if you're listening, you're about to hear a voice we've been wanting to hear for a long time. My co-host for tonight, the one and only Scott Sidlow. How are you doing tonight, Scott?
Hey, somehow I got to skip over the whole summer part of this thing.
Yeah, you did.
So, you guys did a great job filling in the space. So appreciate that. And man, it's August 15th. That's crazy. Like time flies when you work, 18 hours a day. But hey, that's life. So ready for football season, ready to get rolling. We got a lot of good stuff coming up this fall, and should be good as always here on the Junkies.
Amen to that. The summer is a weird time, right? Like, and we talked about this a little bit at the end of last season. It's like, what do we really do in the summer? I mean, do we really need to keep going weekly? I know we've done that in the past years, but part of it is like the summer is where things slow down, and it's like, let's just take a break. Let's get our mentals right. Let's recharge. And Scott, you needed a recharge. I've been there myself. Totally understand. Glad you did it. I think it's a smart move. I know you've been working your butt off in your real world job. You've had some family stuff. Like, take a break. We got the Junkies held down. We're glad you're back. But now we're looking at, this is August 15th when we're recording this. Like, we're less than 3 weeks from the season. Like, we're right there. Like, we are literally like creeping up, believe it or not, to the start of the NFL season for 2024. I'm very excited. So with us tonight as our guest is the one and only Josh Walker, I believe it is. Right, Josh? Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Making sure I got Walker right. At Rotonaut on Twitter. Josh, say hi to the people and tell everybody where they can find what you're doing.
What's up, everybody? I'm happy to be on here. I've watched a few of the episodes before, so I'm happy to finally jump in and talk some running backs. You can find all my Dynasty rankings and even redraft rankings at goingfor2.com. And also on Saturday nights at 7:30, me and Brian Ford do a Dynasty Saturday Night Live, Dynasty Saturday Night 5
I
show.
like it.
And that's at 7:30 on the Going for Two YouTube.
Shout out Brian Ford.
That's right. Love it. I actually, we need to get Brian on the show. That's a good guess,
we should.
Actually. Why haven't I thought about that one? Thank you for that
Absolutely.
reminder. So Josh and I are in the JWB Charity Invite League, which is the co-owner, like the Coney, as they call it, COWNY. I'm actually, this is my first time in that league. Scott was in it, I think, last year or the year before. I don't remember. A couple years ago, I think. Yeah. But it's basically where they get 24 content creators and then randomly assign co-managers to everybody. And I think it's a really unique idea. I was like, you know what? I haven't done this one yet. I try to say yes to everything, but you can't say yes to everything, right? You got to spread it around. So I've been saying no. And this year I said yes. And so Josh and I got paired up. And during those conversations, I was like, hey, why don't you come on Junkies and we can get to know a little bit about each other? The draft is ended. Nobody cares about the draft, but our team is stacked and it's awesome. And I'm very excited, Josh. I think we got a chance. But again, after that, I was like, well, Josh creates content. He knows what's going on. Like, let's get him on here for the running back show. So tonight we're going to be talking about running backs. We're going to get into the depth a little bit about running backs and who we should be taking, who we should be avoiding. Before we do that, though, I definitely want to pivot to the news. It's preseason. If you're new to Dynasty, if you're new to fantasy, the preseason always brings about more pain than pleasure. There's almost always more injuries than non-injuries, right? Like injuries are just kind of, you're just trying to be like Neo in the Matrix and dodging them as much as you can, right? So there was a big injury that came up this week since our last show. JJ McCarthy out for the year with was it a knee injury or
meniscus?
Ankle. Meniscus. Yeah, it wasn't an ACL, right? But it was a meniscus injury. They got in there. They decided what the best thing was to repair the whole thing. And that means he's out for the year. So now we're looking down the barrel of Sam Darnold passing to our boy Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Side note, Jordan Addison also got hurt and has a potential pending off the field infraction. So the Minnesota Vikings are just kind of, I'm sure their fans are just scratching their head going, what the hell are we doing here? Josh, I mean, I think we all know the general idea of what we're doing with JJ McCarthy in Dynasty. We're not starting him, right? Like we're probably putting him on our bench and trying to get some sort of value for him in a rebuild or whatever. But I mean, what are your thoughts about this whole, quarterback switch in Minnesota? Is that a big deal or not?
I think for certain people it is. I don't think it's a huge deal for Justin Jefferson. even as much as some people on, Twitter or X are kind of making it out to be. But if I have him in Dynasty, if I'm a contender and I was needing him either as my QB2 or my backup, I'm probably going to try and trade him to a rebuilding team and trying to either get some picks so you can go and try and trade for, maybe Sam Darnold or just another cheaper quarterback to fill in for him. In a rebuild, you're just going to hold on to him because you're probably not trying to win now anyways. So, yeah, just put him on your taxi, pick up somebody else, and, move on.
Well, on that note, I guess, and we can pivot into this discussion in a bigger sense, but on that note, like, what do you, if you're, let's say you're a contender and you're trying to win this year and you have JJ McCarthy, what are you looking to get in return for him? Odds are you spent a pretty good pick on him, right? Like probably a top 6, top 8 kind of pick, depending on the league and Superflex. One QB, it might be a lot later, right? And that's not as big of a deal, but like in Superflex leagues, I mean, just curious, I guess, what would you want to get in return for JJ McCarthy? Now, he didn't play at all. It was not like he played badly, and this injury is not necessarily like an ACL or an Achilles or something like that. He should return nicely next year. And even this year, there were some question marks about whether or not he was going to start. So what are you looking to get in return for McCarthy if you're contending?
If you can, I would try and get another quarterback in return. I think you could maybe go and if the guy doesn't need him, try and get maybe Bryce Young.
I like that. Yeah.
Just try and get some other teams or some other players on your team that can help contribute and try and get maybe a pick for him and use that pick to maybe try and get a quarterback from somebody else for a little bit cheaper. But I would try and swap him for Bryce Young if you could.
I like Bryce Young. I think Bryce Young's probably you might have to put a little bit more on the JJ McCarthy side, right? Because Bryce Young's going to be scoring, but I don't mind that logic. Scott, what are your thoughts on that? And then in general, what are your thoughts on JJ McCarthy and Sam Darnold for the Vikings?
Yeah, so I just pulled up Keep Trade Cut real quick, and JJ McCarthy's QB 20 on there, and Bryce Young's QB 19. He's literally
there. You go. It's a great pivot, then, isn't it?
Yeah, and then just kind of looking at maybe some older guys too. Jared Goff and Dak Prescott are up there, just a little bit ahead of him. And then Baker and Watson and Cousins and Stafford, usual suspects there below him. So, I mean, if you're competing and the points are worth it, then
could you trade like McCarthy for Stafford plus, right? Like,
sure.
Could you move off of that? I feel like as a McCarthy manager, I'd be fine with that. I know a lot of people are down on Stafford, but if I have Stafford and I'm rebuilding, I don't want Stafford, right? So like, it's got to be the right combination of teams.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I'm higher on JJ than most people. I mean, I've seen every play of this kid from high school.
Well, what school are you a fan of again?
So, I have no idea who won the national championship last year. Not to mention JJ grew up an hour from me. So, and actually, it's the local high school here is how Jim Harbaugh found JJ McCarthy. So, he was recruiting someone, and the guys were like, "Hey, have you seen this kid?" And whatever. 3 weeks later, he's on campus, and the rest is history. So. I'm pretty high on JJ. So, I mean, I don't want to just give him away, but if it's a matter of competing, I mean, I will say I've already sent out north of 20 offers for JJ in a lot of leagues.
What are you sending? Like, what's the general idea?
Yeah. So kind of exactly what we're talking about, just in reverse, right? So any Watson shares I have left, I don't know if I've done Stafford yet, but, Dak, I've got a lot of Dak. Goff, anywhere I can pivot and maybe still get a piece back where maybe that's my second QB or third QB. I'm willing to do that in most leagues. I mean, that's kind of where that goes. I mean, the whole situation's a little crazy, but it kind of shows the organizations, right? Like you look back and you go, okay, well, what injuries are similar? And I mean, the most recent one for a quarterback with this was Zach Wilson, and it was just a few years ago. And I mean, the guy missed a few games and he was back in and going. Now, obviously, didn't work out because he's not a good player. But
Zach Wilson,
interesting that organization just said, "Hey, let's trim it up and get this guy back on the field." Whereas the Vikings are like, "No, let's go in and get it done right." And so just just those two organizations in a nutshell right there. But I mean, overall, I'm gonna go after a guy because just giving him a year to learn and be under Kevin O'Connell. I mean, I love it. So I think he's gonna come out firing next year. And I'm pretty excited for that. And plus, they're going to see Sam Darnold is still a backup. Maybe he can hold down the fort for a little bit, but at some point we're going to see Nick Mullins or something. But they really could use a guy like Kirk Cousins right now, don't you think?
Oh man, wouldn't that be nice? So I think you hit on something really good there, and it's something I want to make sure we kind of pound home. The Deshaun Watson idea, like the Stafford idea, like those are prime picks because Stafford they're very different players, but Stafford is obviously on the older side. He's probably trailing down, and McCarthy is most likely still trending up. So again, if you can kind of make that move as a contender to move away from McCarthy, I feel like you could make that move and be like, all right, well, at least I'm getting points on my team, and this is my year. But if you're rebuilding, or even just in general want to grab the ascending asset, sending somebody like a Stafford and sacrificing the points, I think McCarthy's definitely going to have the better career from here, right? I think also it's interesting that you bring up players, on that same range, like Sam Darnold and Zach Wilson and all this. Like, there's a lot of weird things that we've seen in the NFL, and I think McCarthy, with the draft capital and everything else, it is very smart to take a little bit of a cautious approach to that and just say, hey, hold on, let's shut it down. We weren't sure he was really going to play this year anyway. Listen, I think we all expected at least some snaps this year. I don't think any of us expected zero. Right. But that being said, he wasn't going to be a day one starter. Right. Yeah, I don't think anybody expected that. So as a rebuilding option, I think it's pretty good. And if you can get QB 20 to 25 value for that, I don't think that's a big deal. I think the other angle I want to get on this before we move off of it is, like, does this change anything for you, Josh, on the side of Jetta? This is what I'm thinking of, like Justin Jefferson. Like, does this change anything on the side of, potential top 3 receiver? Does moving from partial Darnold to full Darnold, does that change anything for you for this year, or is it just kind of like you already expected this?
No, it doesn't change a lot. I didn't really expect much of a change when they switched over, because I feel like they're both would be pretty competent passers, and at least on the same bar as Nick Mullins was, if not maybe a little bit more upside. And Justin Jefferson did ball out with Nick Mullins. It was the Lions secondary, and they weren't that good, but I think Justin Jefferson's the best wide receiver in the league, just overall skill and everything put together. So I think if anyone's quarterback proof, it's him. So I'm not too worried. I'm still taking him first round, top 5, top 2 or 3. I could understand taking Tyreek ahead of him, but that's
what I've been doing, is taking Tyreek ahead of him anyway. But that's just because of my personal preference, right? It's not anything, and especially in redraft. My God, like redraft, I don't see why you wouldn't take Tyreek. Like, he's probably got 1 or 2 good years left of those cheetah legs, right? But I think in Dynasty, it's hard to move off of Tyreek for Justin Jefferson by himself. Like, you're gonna have to add to Tyreek to get Justin Jefferson, because the future is so much better there, right? So I think too, in Dynasty, if we're gonna focus on that alone, I don't think JJ McCarthy was really moving the needle at all. Like, in all honesty, like there is a chance, there is a world where JJ McCarthy is better because of Justin Jefferson, not the other way, right? Like, having somebody like Justin Jefferson makes McCarthy QB 20. It's not like when McCarthy's gone, just Jefferson becomes wide receiver 6 again. Like, no, it's not. That's not how it works. That talent is transcendent. I think if anything else, this makes Darnold worth starting in Superflex leagues and Dynasty. It really adds to his value. So, like, Scott, on the flip side of this coin, I guess on the other side, what are you trying to send for Darnold that you feel like is a fair value in Dynasty for a contender? Like, if you need a quarterback, whether you lost McCarthy or not, let's say, again, I'm sure you have a number of these teams too, Scott. Maybe not. Maybe I'm the only crazy person, but I know there are some teams I have where it's like Goff and Geno Smith are my only quarterbacks, right? What should I send for Darnold without selling the house, I guess, is the question here.
Yeah, I think I'd almost rather I would rather go after a guy like Darnold, because he's going to cost less than like a Baker or even a Stafford in some cases. Like, so I think that it makes a lot of sense to add him as kind of your third quarterback in a lot of like the scenario you just brought up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'd probably be willing to pay a second. I don't know if I'm necessarily like,
especially contending second,
but right? I mean, like
if I'm contending second, it's probably a late second. I don't mind that. Yeah, I'm with you.
I mean, I'm not giving up a first. If I'm going to do that, then obviously I'm just going to go to that next tier up and go after like a Goff or a Cousins, somebody like that. But if you just want to kind of add some cheap insurance, the only thing is that, Darnold is not, I think people may be thinking, well, he's now going to start 17 games. I'm not sure that that's true.
It's not a guarantee. Yeah.
So we have to go off the past. I don't think he will be starting 17 games. I think we'll see some Nick Mullins and maybe even somebody else there. If Jaron Hall sticks around, I don't know. But I'd be pretty shocked if he played 17 games. Not
I would
only
be
just
too.
because of his injury history and his past performance. So I don't want to give up a lot, but in the right scenario, I think a second's perfectly acceptable.
Well, I think this is where the other angle comes in. There is a world where Darnold plays well, but not great. And the Vikings end up finishing, fourth in the NFC North. And by week 15, they're out of it. And they have no chance. And so they start throwing other guys in there. They start taking chances on guys that get cut, which haven't even happened yet, right? Like there could be guys like Bailey Zappi on the waiver wire. There could be guys like Jake Browning they go trade for. Like, we don't know what we don't know. And there is a world where they decide, hey, Darnold, appreciate you. You got us through this year. And none of us expected you to do well. You didn't do well. We're going to move on and try to find a good backup for the next year. Maybe Darnold earns that spot. Maybe he doesn't. There's so many question marks with him, right?
Right.
So there are a lot of things that have to go right for Darnold to earn this job long term. And I think the way that the draft capital fell with McCarthy and everything, it's not his job long term. And I think, too, there is a world where he plays well enough where the Vikings say, let's not start him and risk it. Let's trade him to somebody. Like, we don't want him to get hurt. Like, there's so many different games within the game here too. So my logic is like, I don't want to give up anything more than a mid to late second at all for Darnold right now, but I don't mind giving that up because those picks are lottery tickets anyway. Like, I don't mind giving up a lottery ticket for a lottery ticket. That feels fair, right? If you can do something like if you've got if the guy that has Darnold already has 3 starting quarterbacks, but is light at running back, right? If you can send like Chubb in a third, something like that, like that could maybe get that done, like fill a need that they have, fill a void that they have, fix a need on their team. Like, that might be what I try to do instead, because I'd rather hold the second. But if you can't, you can't. And if you need a quarterback, you need a quarterback. And now at least we know he's going to be the guy.
If you want to pivot off like a Rodgers or a Stafford, somebody who doesn't have a lot of time left, and you just have not been able to trade them, what if you can just say, how about Rodgers and a third for Darnold and a second, something like that. Yep. Like, and if he's your third quarterback, I'd definitely be willing to do that.
Yep. No, that's kind of where I'm at. So I think that covers us for the Vikings talk. I mean, again, I feel really bad for Vikings fans. This was like a 1-2 punch with McCarthy. And again, I don't think any of them were expecting him to come in and be like a Caleb Williams and lead him to the promised land, but there was a lot of optimism and hope there. And to see that dashed before the season even starts just sucks, right? And then, of course, the Jordan Addison injury and the potential off the field issue. They're just, and the Hawkinson issue, and like I'm looking at this whole Viking situation as a Aaron Jones is going to dominate. Maybe I'm wrong here, but like I feel strongly about that. So, I mean, before we entirely move on from the Vikings, is there anything else you have to say, Josh, about the Vikings, or like any players you're targeting with this news, or are we just kind of going into the year seeing how it goes and who's going to get hurt next?
Yeah, so I'm kind of the exact situation we talked about happened in one of my leagues. I'm competing and finished third last year. And through the offseason, I had Jalen Hurts, Baker, and then Justin Fields. I got offered Justin Jefferson for Jalen Hurts straight up. My wide receivers were kind of weak, so I accepted it. It's like, I'll figure out quarterback later. And now the guy's offered me Darnold. But the trade he offered me, I was going to ask your question about.
Sure.
I received Darnold and a 26 second, and I give up a 26 first.
So it's in 26, both picks. That's not bad. I don't mind that because it's 2 years out. I also feel like just tearing up around for him, like that's a good package. I get both sides. And again, if you're contending, which it sounds like with Jefferson, obviously you might be, and that stack could be kind of fun. I don't hate it, right? I don't hate it. Josh or Scott, what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I like the stack, and I mean, it's a savvy offer. He's probably winning that trade, but I mean, if it gets you towards your end goal, if you're going to cash in the league or, compete for a championship, then who cares, right? So maybe it might be something where if you don't feel strongly about it, that trade might be there in, 2 months.
Well, that was going to be my only question to it, is like, why make that trade now?
Yeah.
Right. Like you can wait, like the hype might be good now. You might be able to get like a 25 second in Darnold for a 26 first or something like that. You might be able to pivot or add a third or whatever. Like you might be able to add another piece, or like even like a Chubb or something, like a small running back or something, like, you never know. So I don't think there's any reason to do that now. And I guess that's maybe the best place to land this Vikings plane. Don't overreact, right? Like, don't freak out. We still have weeks to go. There are, sadly, I hate it, but there probably will be other injuries that we still have to deal with and dodge and figure out what to do with. So part of me is looking at this like, don't overreact. If you have McCarthy, you hopefully weren't leaning on him this year anyway. So just give it some time. But like, let's just think about it rationally. Let's take a step back. Don't worry about your lineup still for another week or two. We got Labor Day coming up. Once that clears and the week one is right on us, that's when you start making those trades. That trade makes a lot more sense the Wednesday before the first week than it does right now, even just because there could be other people buying. You might want to get in there and like try to, maybe the price goes up. So maybe that's the time to do it. But my logic is let's just hold on. Maybe you can go get a Geno Smith, somebody who's not been talked about, somebody like, lower down the totem pole, like a Will Levis or something for cheaper than that. Maybe that's a better answer anyway. So don't freak out. Don't go make a move you don't like and just, slow down, take a breath. The other news that I definitely wanted to bring up was related to running backs. And this preseason, we've seen a couple injuries, but it turns out neither were as terrifying as they were initially released, I guess. Jahmyr Gibbs and Tyrone Tracy. Now, obviously, both very different ends of the dynasty spectrum. Jahmyr Gibbs is probably a top 3 dynasty running back right now. A lot of people had him high in PPR. His injury was bad and then not as bad. And then Tyrone Tracy is somebody I know I've been grabbing late in best ball drafts, and I've got a lot of him in late redraft leagues and things like that. And of course, he came up gimpy, and there was a threat that he might be out for the season. And there's still a chance that some of that might happen. But from what I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, both of them should only miss, a few weeks here and there. They both should be good to go for this season. Neither one is out for the year. But I guess, Scott, I'll go to you first. Are you worried about any of these injuries to these two specific backs? And then do we even really care about running back injuries this time of year? I feel like they just happen anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, most of them I'm not going to pay attention to. The only thing it might do for me is be a tiebreaker on waivers if I'm adding a player. So a guy who's been kind of popular lately is Dante Miller, this Giants running back who nobody's ever heard of. So if Tyrone Tracy gets banged up, now that gives Dante Miller just another step towards, making a roster and doing something. So if I've got, 4 or 5 guys on waivers I'm trying to pick up, right.
Yeah.
Eric Gray. So I might just bump those guys up the list a little bit. You never know, but ultimately I'm not going to be doing anything crazy. Always, whenever there's news, as we always say, if there's a buy opportunity, take that buy opportunity, right?
Well, that was going to be my question. Like on these injuries, and I say this very, very carefully and specifically, if the Gibbs or Tracy manager in your league is panicking, now is the time to buy. But from my experience in my leagues, they're not panicking. Right. And therefore it's not a time to buy, because if they're going to try to get full value, now is the wrong time to do that. Right. So maybe this is the angle to go with this. If somebody in your league is kind of, you get the vibe that they're just not into Gibbs anymore, Josh. Like, what are you trying to send for Gibbs on this news? Like, I don't want to buy a damaged running back for full value, but what is cheap value for Gibbs?
I'm not even sending out offers for him. I'm afraid, sending out offers as soon as these news come up this early kind of comes across as like it could rub people the wrong way, I think, and make them not really want to work with you.
Great way to put it. Yeah, because they tend to go, really whoa, never mind.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
it's
I'm with you.
It's like they know what you're trying to do. They know. So I'm going to wait a little bit. If it's like there's some reports where they're saying he might be questionable for week 1, then you might send out some offers then. But I'm not really. Actually, in that same league, I got an offer I denied pretty quickly. It was going to give me Kenneth Walker. Hang on, let me pull it up so I can.
Yeah, go for it. But on that note, too, while you pull that up, like I'm kind of with you. I feel like I've done this a couple of times in my home league and it never works, right? Just out of curiosity, I'll send the Rashi Rice manager an offer like a second for Rice, and they just go, no, I'm going to wait. And it makes them dig their heels in even further and be like, no, I don't want out of this, right? So that's kind of where I was going with this in general anyway. Like, is there even an offer you would send for Gibbs? Not to say that we're worried about Gibbs, but now is not the time to buy quite yet, right? It's got to be a couple of weeks or some other blurb's got to come out. I'm with you.
Yep.
So what was that trade there? You were pulling it up. I just want to make sure you had time to do that.
No, you're good. So I would in return, I would give up Gibbs and Marshawn Lloyd, and I would receive Kenneth Walker, Trey Benson, and a 25 first. I declined it because I really like Gibbs, and I'm going to talk about Trey Benson here later. I'm not quite as
foreshadowing. I like that. No, I think that's probably what I would do too. I feel like that seems a little heavy. Yeah, there's a first in there, but I don't know if those other two, Kenneth Walker and Trey Benson, like that's a lot of risky assets in my book.
Yeah.
And Gibbs is still a stud, even with this injury. I'd rather hold and weather the injury than quote unquote sell low, which is what it feels like you'd be doing there. Scott, are you on that same page?
Yeah, pretty much. I think it would be hard for me to give up Gibbs for that package, but not.
But what if it was like Walker
a
and 2 firsts, right? Because Benson, maybe not a first, but what if it was Walker and 2 firsts for Gibbs? That sounds a little better to me, right? Like I don't mind that as much.
I guess it just depends on the league, setting, starters, roster. But yeah, I mean it's not an unfair offer. It's I'm not swapping around running backs like right before the season. Like it's just I just don't see the point.
You're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just like come on, they're all running backs. Like the thing you don't want to do is send Gibbs in a trade for somebody like Kenneth Walker, and then the next day you get a report Kenneth Walker has now had an injury. Like just what are we doing? Like just hold on to the guy you got. I think there is some value too in saying he didn't get like damaged badly for the year. Like maybe this is the time to be like, thank God I have Gibbs. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was just a little injury. They're probably not going to play him at all till the season starts. That's what you want. Like that's the ideal situation. You know what I mean? Like don't put him out there. Don't put him in training. Like let's just let him heal up. Like that's the answer. So yeah.
Well, also this is pretty typical early in the year. I'm a big baseball and fantasy baseball fan, and early in the year, spring training, you always get hurt a lot more. Injuries are always more because you're ramping up activity.
Yep, you're stretching.
You're more excited
before all that. Yep,
exactly. So this is nothing we shouldn't expect and nothing to overreact to.
No, I completely agree. But I wanted to use those two especially as a way to pivot into our main topic tonight, which is, of course, running back prep. So this is the week we're talking about running backs. We did quarterbacks last week with Jeff Bell. We had a great time with that. But with running backs, it's a little bit weird. I don't know. Dynasty is, in my opinion anyway, running backs are the least valued asset in Dynasty, which is rightfully so, right? They're the most fragile. They're the least consistent. They're the easiest turnover position year to year. We've seen it every year. I remember back when LaDainian Tomlinson was king, and then Adrian Peterson was king, and then Todd Gurley was king, and then Le'Veon Bell was. And when they drop off, they disappear, and you can't get anything for them. So running backs are a tricky one, and I think there are a lot of dynasty managers out there that are looking for like a way to make running backs consistent, and it's just not a thing. I think running backs in general are something I look at as the last piece of the puzzle if I'm contending, right? So if I'm rebuilding, I don't want running backs. I don't have a need for them. They're just going to get hurt. They're going to lose value. I don't want anything to do with them. But if I'm contending, that's when I pivot to be like, all right, what running backs can I grab to make my run this year? Because you can get really good values for some of these running backs that are going to put up solid points this year and maybe disappear into the ether after this. So I put on the sheet, I put a ton of running backs for us to have just everything listed out, right? I think I got 89 running backs I put on the show sheet from DLF. Still going on July, 1 QB DLF ADP, just so that we're all looking at the same numbers here. August ADP should be coming out soon. Maybe by next week when we do receivers, we'll have that. But running back is kind of a hellscape, if I'm being honest. There's a lot of players I like and a lot of players I hate. So I guess I just want to start the conversation kind of like we did last week. And Josh, I'll kick it to you first. Which of these running backs on this list would you consider overvalued in Dynasty, as in like somebody that you're just not interested in at their current price? And you can list 1, 2, 3, maybe we keep it to 4, but I don't want to get too deep on this either. But what running backs are you kind of avoiding in general in Dynasty?
So right now, the one I put down is Trey Benson. I just talked about him a little bit. He's RB16 in my Dynasty rankings. I have him at 27. So, I mean, I'm not like super down on him, but he's relying really on an injury to really get consistent playing time, because I do think James Conner is going to be very good. I think until he gets hurt, it's going to be his backfield. And there's just other guys around him, like especially Josh Jacobs right behind him, Joe Mixon, David Montgomery, all those guys after him who are going to get a lot more work and a lot more guaranteed work. So I'm not really trying to buy into Trey Benson at that price.
I like that logic too. And honestly, like it's funny to me in a way that Benson's going ahead of the starter James Conner at running back 35. This feels like rookie fever. Like this has rookie fever all over it. Like there's a world where Trey Benson never gets to start, right? So like it's a little bit of a little bit overvaluation of a rookie is kind of what it feels like. And I'm right there with you. I don't hate this logic at all. Scott, what are you thinking about when it comes to Trey Benson?
Yeah, I mean, he's actually one of the few rookies I have very, very few shares of, just because of you know, I guess where he was going in drafts, and I always valued other players over him.
Same.
So I think I'm with you on that, Josh. Yeah, there's actually kind of a lot of backs in Arizona. Not that they're good, but there's a lot of them. So
They don't need to be good. They're just in the way. Yeah, no,
they're just I mean, they brought in Michael Carter, and then they signed DJ Dallas to that contract. Like, what is that all about? Why? DeMercado's still hanging around. I mean, there's just, and then Connor seems to be like all of a sudden indestructible. Like the guy was made out of glass, in Pittsburgh, and then he comes to Arizona and the guy just like
healthy as
up. Who cares? Yeah. 26
yeah.
touches, it's like, what?
It's the damnest thing.
It's, it's cool to see. Like, it's a good story, especially everything he dealt with. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. For some reason, I don't see the disconnect between like Benson and Marshawn Lloyd, the massive value difference they appear to have. I mean, Marshawn Lloyd, I think, is my most rostered running back. Like, why Benson would be the 202 and Lloyd I could get at the 308 makes zero sense to me. I think Lloyd has far less to deal with. We all know AJ Dillon sucks, and they don't really have anything else there besides Jacob. So, yeah, I mean, to me, it's strange that he's so highly valued. I didn't see a huge difference between him and the other backs in this class as far as why he would be valued almost as highly as Jonathan Brooks.
No, I'm with you on that. I think too that the rookie fever, especially when it comes to guys like Trey Benson, who aren't even gonna start, at least that we know of, it feels like an easy overvalue to me, right? And we got Puff Pass here in the chat, which again, I love you tuning in. Michael Carter is the next Trey Benson. I think it's the other way around, but I think his point is valid. Like, Trey Benson is the next Michael Carter, right? Like, right. Michael Carter was supposed to be the guy in New York and never ended up being the guy. And I remember in my home one QB league, I think Michael Carter went like the 105. And the guy was like, man, Michael Carter's going to be the guy. I'm very excited. Crickets, never saw that value come to fruition, right? So I love that pick, Josh. I think that's a great one. So Scott, what about you? What player, maybe let's keep it in the top 30 that you feel like is overvalued? And you can pick a rookie, but I'd like you to get a little bit different if you're interested in that.
Yeah, so it kills me to say it because he could easily come out and be RB1 this year and no one will be surprised, but his value is not going up, and that's Saquon Barkley.
There it is.
He's 27 years old. He's had large, touch seasons. He's had an extensive injury history. Does his situation improve? Is he now on hopefully a good offense and all that? Yeah. I think he could crush this year. Like, if I had a bet on it, I'd say more likely he does than doesn't. But even so, even if he finishes, let's say he's RB2 this year. Where's his value going to go after that? It's not going up. He's already 27. Like, we know what happens. I mean, CMC is somehow still hanging in there, but again, just because of what he brings, could Barkley just hang in for another year where his value doesn't drop? I mean, sure, but I don't know, man. There's just, the wheel of running backs, it just keeps on turning. So I just don't see Barkley continuing up. Like, he's a guy that I'm trying to move off of at this point where possible. Most likely those will be in-season trades. I don't think we'll be able to trade him for what I'd like to get August 15th, but he's the guy on this list that almost no matter what he does, he's not going to be higher on this list next year.
Well, I like the way you put that. And that was going to be the guy that I brought up here, was Saquon Barkley. And it's only because I really like Saquon Barkley. But in Dynasty, I'm with you. I don't know how, in what world, even if Saquon Barkley finishes as the RB1, I don't know if I see him going up from his current RB6 valuation in ADP. That's a big leap because he's older. He's on a new team. Yes, it worked. But will it work again? There's still going to be questions, even if everything goes exactly right? Which is asking a lot. I think there is a world where Barkley finishes top 10 and next year he's RB8. You know what I mean? Like I don't know what in the world could happen to get him higher than RB6. Like we already know that there's going to be at least 2 or 3 rookies that, pummel themselves above Barkley. We've got guys like Devon Chan and Travis Etienne and hell, even James Cook and Jonathan Brooks, like you mentioned. Like there's a bunch of guys that could easily, find their way in the top 5. And all of a sudden we're looking at Barkley as having his best season ever. And oh my God, he was RB1. And he's RB8. Like I'm right there with you. And that's actually why I wanted to bring him up too. Like, I feel like he's overvalued, but also kind of dead on. You know what I mean? Like I see the logic because there is sort of a tier break there. So I guess since you answered with the pick that I was going to have, my other question, or I guess my other point here was in overvalued anyway, is I can only really find overvalued at the top. And so that's kind of where I go to this whole list and I look who's overvalued. And generally speaking, when I have a running back that hits RB1 in Dynasty, I'm out. And that's Bijan Robinson right now. And it's no fault of Bijan. I'm not saying Bijan's a terrible player. I'm not saying sell Bijan for anything. I'm not crapping on Bijan. It's just when you hit the pinnacle, that is the best time to move by definition. Like he's not going to get higher than RB1. He's not going to be better than what he is right now. He's going to be a year older. There's going to be other backs that come into this. He's going to have more tread off the tires, whatever you want to put it. So my only other option for overvalued is the top of the crop. And if you can sell Bijan, let's say, for instance, you can sell Bijan for Gibbs in a first. I'm taking that. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I'll tier down within 1 to 2 if you want to call it a second tier, like within the same tier, even for a lot of people. If I can trade Bijan for Jonathan Taylor and a first and a third, I might do that. You know what I'm saying? Like I just want out because as soon as you get to that RB1, and again, when it comes to rankings or ADP or whatever you want to do, you're not going to get more than that for them. It's just impossible. It just doesn't feel like there's ever a chance. I'd rather have an ascending asset than a definitely descending asset like Bijan. So that's where my head goes with this. But Barkley was my number one answer. I was like, Barkley for me at RB6 just feels like a screaming overvalue. And again, no hate to Barkley. Love the guy. I just don't. I love him this year. In redraft,
hope he smashes. Like
in redraft, In redraft, he's somebody I'm targeting. I love the guy.
Yeah.
But in Dynasty, now is definitely the time to sell. So let's pivot the other direction. Let's look at this then, Josh. What would you call an undervalued running back? Like who is somebody in this list up to RB89 that you think is being disrespected that you want more of?
So the guy for me, and I did this based on my own rankings, and because I just use my rankings pretty much straight up when I do startups. And for me, that's Brian Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
He's all the way down at RB32. I have him ranked at 23. Last year was pretty much his first full time in the league because he got shot. That's pretty hard to come back from. All the trauma.
How many times have we said that sentence, right?
Yeah. He looked really good last year. He showed really good pass catching ability last year, able to hit some big plays. And I mean, we saw how Austin Eckler looked last year. I think he'll be fine, but I do like Robinson getting the early down work and Eckler coming in on third downs. Maybe in the 2-minute drill, Robinson will be off the field. But either way, I really like Brian Robinson where you can get him. He's going to get a lot of touches, and he's going to be pretty efficient and be able to catch some passes on first and second down.
Love that. Yeah, Brian Robinson currently RB32, and Eckler is RB37 according to DLF ADP. So now we're looking at ADP, and I prefer ADP for these kind of conversations because that's like actual drafts that matter. I know a lot of people that have Robinson ranked higher than that. I know a lot of people that like Robinson this year, and that Washington offense in general, I feel like is getting disrespected. If you think about it, RB32 means like you're the last offense, like you're the last option. And going right behind him is Aaron Jones, which would be my pick. Again, we just talked about it a little bit earlier. Like Aaron Jones is switching teams, obviously from Green Bay to Minnesota within the division. And I think there's a very high likelihood that Aaron Jones produces just as well, if not better than last year, because that team's going to need him to. But he reminds me a lot of Robinson. He's one of those guys that is just being disrespected in Dynasty because he's an old name. He's not fun. He's not hot. Like he's on a team that's kind of in chaos. And, I don't know if I really want to bother both of those guys. I think both of those guys are being undervalued and are criminally being somebody that I am glad to have at their value. And if you can send I think there was one trade I sent a third and Demario Douglas for Brian Robinson. And the guy was like happy to accept. And I was like, Okay. Like,
Okay.
like we're talking about, I mean, I liked Mario Douglas, so I hated losing him, but for that value, I'm fine going up the ladder in a sense to get Brian Robinson. Now, there are other places I've tried sending a second for Brian Robinson and it won't work. Like, I won't do it because he's higher on him than I am or than the ADP is. So I think, again, I just wanted to, I'll mention my Aaron Jones in that same milieu because he's right there, right? But it's one of those things like, he's still talented. He's still going to get the ball. Like Blake Corum is going ahead of him. Why? What are we doing?
Yeah.
Najee Harris, who I think is another potentially undervalued guy, is RB26. Marshawn Lloyd at RB27. Javonte Williams at 29. Like, these are all guys that, in my opinion, Robinson should outscore them easily. So I think that's a great pick. Scott, what did you think about Robinson? And then what would be your pick for undervalued player?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people think Eckler's toast. And I don't know if he's quite toast. He was definitely really hurt last year.
He's avocado toast. He's like fancy toast.
Yeah, he's getting
what
there.
I mean?
He's getting there. He's lightly, just starting to. But yeah, so I like that with B-Rob. I have a lot of shares of B-Rob. So let's hope that's the truth. And yeah, Aaron Jones, I think now maybe he isn't in like a super, there's not a lot of potential for the offense without JJ, but he should have, pretty good workload. I mean, Ty Chandler might take a little bit. Okay. But like that, he's pretty limited. So yeah, I mean, both of those guys I'm going to have a lot of shares of. For me, just looking through this whole list, I mean, I like to have like 3 or 4 guys from, RB, 18 down.
Amen.
Occasionally I'm going to have a couple of those top guys, depending on how things worked out with my rosters. But ideally I have like 3, 4, 5 of these guys. And the one guy that jumps out to me the most is RB 42, Chase Brown.
Amen, brother. Yes.
Like, wait, who's in front of him? Zach Moss. Like, what? And like, I love Zach Moss coming out, so it's kind of funny for me to say that, but like,
so did I. But that was how many years ago? Like that, you know what I'm saying? Like, no offense to Zach Moss, but that was like 4 years ago.
What he is. We know what he is, and like, and you know what? He should play that role very well in that offense and be exactly what they want him to be. But if you're talking about a difference maker, that's Chase Brown. He's the guy who can do that. And I think it's so funny when people are like, oh, this guy, he's so small and he can't handle a lot of touches. And it's like, did you even do any research? Like, I just watched this guy 3 hours away from me in Champaign, Illinois here, just like absolutely get 30 carries a game, like old school Big Ten football. And I mean, I've seen the guy do it. So I know he can. I just think he's got so much upside. I mean, every running back on here is, potentially an injury away from being, very relevant, obviously. But I just think if all these guys are healthy and everybody comes out in the first, few weeks of the season, like, who's the guy who's most likely to have the biggest jump without an injury? I think it's Chase Brown.
I don't hate that at all. As a Bengals fan and as a fantasy fan, like, I'm with you entirely. I think that there's actually a group of 4 that I wanted to bring up, and Chase is 42. Kendra Miller at 41 feels like an interesting, quietly going under the radar. Because again, Alvin Kamara, obviously a stud in the past. Will that continue? That offense is going to be very different. I feel like they're going to be going through some changes. Maybe they give the ball to Kendra and see what they have before they go into the draft.
Cheap.
Yes, Kendry very cheap because, again, nobody's talking about him. And then you got the guy right after Chase Brown at RB43, Gus Edwards, and RB44, Devin Singletary, who both could be and should be or lined up to be starters this year. Like, those guys could both, in my opinion, raise their dynasty stock. Unlike Barkley, who's at RB6, that's his ceiling. These guys could both vault themselves into the RB20 plus range, right? So, like, that's where I'm looking at this. Like, you're getting guys in the 40s that could easily be in the 20s. And that's what I want from a running back. I want to be able to get somebody on the cheap and then see their ascent. And I think these are all guys that after week 3, you could trade them for more than you could get them for now. And that's really all I'm looking for, is their value goes up. I want a part of that. Puff Pass here in the chat is mentioning Kendry is banged up. I know that. But again, in Dynasty, I don't worry about banged up, especially in the preseason, especially at running backs. I just feel like by week 6, it may not matter if Alvin Kamara is more banged up than Kendry. So like that's where I'm looking at this.
New
Like,
offense.
what is that offense going to be
New
doing?
offense.
Right.
Take a shot.
New offense. Exactly. So that's where I'm going with this. Like, so part of this is I think all of those guys in that range are guys that I want. There's even a couple others that, we could get into the weeds on this, but I don't want to talk about all 89 running backs. But I guess let's go to the next piece of questioning here, which I think we've already kind of answered the second batch. I'll kind of go to the third, but Josh, who is somebody that you're trading for? Like, who is somebody you want to actively that you're trying to acquire in dynasty leagues right now as we head into the season in terms of running back anyway?
So I kind of split mine up in a rebuild. I'm going after completely different guys. If I'm looking to acquire running backs in rebuild, which is kind of rare to do, but if you do, I think Ray Davis and Will Shipley are pretty good targets to go after.
Yeah.
If you're trying to build a young core, those are two guys I like because I think they'll both contribute and their value will go up. So those are some. And if I'm a deep contender, I'm going after James Conner, Devin Singletary, Aaron Jones, some of those really cheap veterans who are going to produce this year. Because if you're contending and you get a win and their value falls off, okay, it's probably time to rebuild anyways. It's not that big of a deal because he probably won't pay that much for them anyways. So I think that's worth it to go try and win a championship. So you can get a lot of veterans for cheap. That's mainly who I'm targeting if I'm going to trade, or some young rookies who I think their value will skyrocket. Then you could either move off of them or just ride the wave.
Well, I like where you put Ray Davis, I think was in that, right? Like that was one that I remember looking at too as a trade target. However, I have found that most people that have Ray Davis are high on Ray Davis, and that's why they have Ray Davis. Yeah. So unless you get to a point in your roster construction where there are roster cuts or people have to come off of IR in week 1, like I think that's maybe the only time you might have to make a trade for Ray Davis. I don't think he's going to hit waivers, obviously, but when you get to those roster cuts, you might be able to send a third for Ray Davis, and the guy might be like, "Hey, I spent the 403 on Ray Davis, I'll take it," or whatever it happened to be, right? Like that, maybe you could send a second for Ray Davis and a third, or whatever it happens to be, right? Like that, I think you might be able to make a move there where it's not that they're dropping Davis, it's that they have to drop someone. And now they don't because you're giving them a pick that they can get in later. I think that's a good point too. Ray Davis, though, again, as a rookie at Buffalo, going as RB45, like he's in that same range that we were just talking about. And I like what you said too about going after vets. I think vets are somebody that almost always be degrading every year. J.K. Dobbins is one of the ones that I like trading for right now. I know that there's a lot of people out on him, and I get why, but Dobbins going at RB54. I mean, there's a non-zero chance that by week 6, he's the guy in LA, right? Like there is an option. I mean, Gus Edwards is not the pinnacle of health. We've seen him get a little dinged up himself, and that team is going to run the ball. I'm pretty sure. Obviously, Scott's familiar with the Harbaugh method and what they want to do there. They don't have a lot of offensive weapons aside from, Quentin Johnston's hands are terrible, and there's a whole bunch of other question marks. Like, so I could see a world where J.K. Dobbins outperforms his RB54 kind of price, but it's the same logic you were saying, Josh, and I like where your head's at. Like, those are the guys I want to get. I'm not trying to go out right now and get Kyron Williams. I'm not trying to go get Isaiah Pacheco. Like, those guys are like, they're also
like that.
Yeah. Like, not only are they going to be expensive, but you're going to have to pay out the ass, and you're going to feel like you have to lose that trade just to get them. Unless you're contending with 0 running backs, what are you doing? Like, go get the ascending assets and take a risk, right? That's kind of where I'm at. So, Scott, what are your thoughts on that, I guess? And then if you want to pivot into the guys you're looking for too, is it trade targets outside of who we already talked about? That'd be great.
Yeah, general philosophy is, we're not necessarily trading for running backs in the summer or early in the season. And
we
so
talked about it all summer while you were gone, Scott.
Really, exactly. And so the way we're adding them is waiver wire, right? And one of the big storylines I've been keeping my eye on is the returns. So a lot of my leagues, I think it's about 50-50 as far as, I don't have the exact number, but about the 50 leagues I'm in, at least half do return yardage of some sort. And so, some of those guys are going to be, cornerbacks, whatever. They're not going to be relevant. But when they're receivers or running backs, I'm keeping an eye on that. So I've been tracking it in preseason, and then I've been following, obviously, the beat reporters. And so I have a handful of names that either they've been noted as the potential backup and or handcuff, or having a role or getting return yardage. So, I mean, these are the guys that I've been adding most recently, which would be Jordan Mason, Dante Miller, Pierre Strong is a big one in Cleveland because there's a lot of, that whole backfield right now, who knows? But it looks like he's going to have first shot at returns as well. So your return yardage leagues, Sione Vaki, Jawar Jordan, and Isaiah Davis. So all those guys are all names that nobody's going to get excited about. But those are the exact kind of guys I want to have at the end of my roster, because if they make the 53 and they're there, great. We'll just see what happens. And if they don't, cool, I cut them and I'll pick up somebody else. And I mean,
bingo.
That's the roster spot is actually the next most valuable thing. So, correct. If I can cut them, that's valuable too. So they're my top 6 most added over the last, 14 days or so.
Well, and I know we both prescribe or subscribe, or whatever you want to call it, to the Scott Connor any RB on a 53 method. And I think that's the way I tend to look at this. I'd much rather have a team's RB3 than a team's wide receiver 3.
Yep.
Like, give me the RB3, because all it takes is one injury for them to now be the RB2, and they go in on a third down and break a 35-yard touchdown. We see it every year where somebody crazy comes out in the preseason and blows up and the value goes through the roof, and then they never do anything again. I want that guy on my team before that happens, right? Whether it's preseason and whether it's real or not, doesn't matter. The perceived value goes up. That's somebody I'm looking for right now, because we haven't seen the perceived value go up. On the same page, I don't want to buy somebody whose value just went up, right? That makes zero sense from a stock trading analyst and idea. Like, I don't want to buy something that just had a bump. I want to buy somebody who hasn't had a bump, who I think will have a bump. And that's kind of where all of those guys down there at the bottom, right? And I think there is some value in saying, is this guy going to make the roster, right? That's a whole different question. But with receiver, you're going to have 6-7 receivers on some teams make a roster. I don't care about anybody past wide receiver 3 on a team. And even then, some wide receiver 3s I could care less about. But running back 3 or even running back 4, I want those guys on my roster. Like the threshold receiver mentality, right? Like, I want all those guys on my bench, because those are the guys that I think have an easier chance to see a spike. And when they do, it's a bigger spike. So it's kind of a win-win. So again, when it comes to running backs, I want guys like Alexander Madison, who is kind of forgotten about in Las Vegas, RB80. I want guys like, who was the other one I was thinking about earlier? I was looking at this. Bucky Irving at RB50 is another name that I really like, that I think could be RB50. RB50. You're talking about outside of redraft territory in most leagues. And that guy could be the RB1 on Tampa next year. Like, give me that guy every chance I can get. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, as much as you want to hate him, RB66, I think there's still a world where he gets carries. As much as you want to hate him, that price is where I like it now. He's not RB25. He's RB66. Like, my God, like, that offense is going to be running the ball. So again, I think when it comes down to this, what you got to look at is everybody has potential. You can trade for everybody, but it's always the price that matters. And on the other side of that, who is somebody you're trying to trade away, Scott? I'll go to you first. Like, which of these running backs are you just fed up with? You're done. And I don't know if you want to count the top guys, because I think those are kind of easier answers, but like, who are you just kind of out on? If you're going to go get a guy like, I don't know, Bucky Irving, who are you trying to get off of to get that guy?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm going to try to use any hype that I can, or anybody that earns a role. Sadly, Jaylen Warren is a guy I've traded quite a bit of lately, just because people seem to think, like Najee's done and whatever. And it's like, oh, okay. I mean,
we don't know that.
Maybe, but I mean, have you seen Arthur Smith? Okay. So, it's just guys like that are, I'm more likely to acquire the Najee and trade away the Jaylen Warren, just because whichever one has more value, honestly, between those two guys, pick one. Like, if you put betting odds on who's gonna score more points this season, like, it would be even, would it not? Like, who's like, if anything, maybe Warren has a little bit better chance, and so that's exactly why I'd rather trade him, because honestly, I don't know. So yeah, it's typically those ambiguous backfields.
Warren is 24 and Harris is 26. So I'm right there with you. Like, of the two, I'd rather sell the higher one. I'm right there with you. Like, that makes total sense to me. And Warren just happens to be the higher one right now.
Give me 1 year. If Najee gives me one more year, great. That's all I need.
Yep. Now, when it comes to trading away, I'm looking for players that I can get a lot of or a lot from. So, Josh, what player are you looking at when it comes to like trading away a player? Who are you trying to get off of your roster before the season starts?
So the guy I've traded the most, and I won't get into it because it's an earlier guy, and you guys talked about it. Saquon Barkley, I think now's the time to get out.
Great pick.
Yep. That's the main one there. But going down further, I'm trying to get off of, especially at this price, Alvin Kamara. He's going to be productive, but he's getting up there in age. He's battling some injuries.
RB21, yeah.
Yep. You can probably get a good bit for him. Just going down the list, there's guys like Raheem Mostert. He was, RB1 or 2 overall last year, but he's also 30. He wasn't injured last year, but he's had a lot of injuries history in the 32.
Past. Yeah. He's old.
Yeah. So any aging guy that I feel like I can get good value for, obviously, like I think Aaron Jones is more valuable just being on your team, just because the value
100%,
and you're not going to get a ton for him anyways. So if I'm trading these guys, I'm going to be patient, wait for them to have some spike weeks during the year. Like you said, don't trade them away now. Wait until they start to hit and wait till their value's at the highest, and then try and get what you can for them.
Yep, no, I'm right there with you. I think Barkley is actually the one guy that I was thinking of this, but we talked about him already. I'm right there with you though. Like if I can get full value as an RB6 for Barkley, like if somebody out there is willing to give me willing to take my Barkley for ETN and a piece all day, smash accept. Like that's an easy one to me. I'd even go down from Barkley to something like Jonathan Brooks or even Kenneth Walker, who we kind of talked about, or Rashad White. Like I'm fine tearing down that far and getting a good piece back if I can. Now, granted, that may not always be possible, right? Just because this is ADP does not mean everybody agrees with ADP. Average is an average. There are going to be outliers. Your league, it may not ever be possible. Not in my league, right? Like that's fine. This is an average. It's meant to be one data point, not the data point. So make sure you keep that in mind. But on the other end of things, like getting rid of a player, especially a running back, you're going to have to find the right buyer. There's a lot of teams in my leagues, especially. I'm sure Scott, who's in more than I am. It's like when you get into that many leagues, there are not all 11 teams are buying running backs, right? Which has got to be something you got to be careful with too. If I'm selling a running back, there's only going to be 2 or 3 other teams that are really buying, and they're probably competing with me. So then there's that logic of, well, do I want to give away a Saquon Barkley and give away the points they're going to get? Can I sacrifice those points this year to try to still win and help that team get better? Like there's other calculus to it, right? So I know, and that's kind of why I like buying and selling at the bottom. But I think Jaylen Warren was a good answer for the sake of argument. And I think another one that I was looking at on here earlier, Braylon Allen is another name that I keep hearing a lot for the Jets. He's a rookie. Obviously, Braylon Allen, we don't know what he's going to be. He feels like a Michael Carter, even though it's the same team, but it's that same logic, right? Like, I just don't know what to believe of this guy. Breece Hall is a beast. The New York Jets are kind of, smoking something, pun intended. And it's like, I don't know what to do with that team this year in general, like getting Mike Williams, and they have Garrett Wilson, and they've got a lot of good players. Aaron Rodgers, of course, and like Tyler Conklin is moving up the tight end ratings, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks. But for me, it's like, if I can get out on the hype of Braylon Allen, if I can pivot from, let's say, for instance, from a Braylon Allen and pivot down to a Tyrone Tracy, or down even to even something cheaper like Will Shipley, like you mentioned, and I can get a solid piece in addition to that, I'm probably doing that. Or on the other end, if I can do something like Braylon Allen and a piece to get up to Kamani Vidal, or get all the way up to Jalen Wright, like those other rookies, I'm doing that, right? Like it's not that I hate Braylon Allen. I just kind of hate his value. I just feel like, I don't know, that RB 53 right ahead of J.K. Dobbins. I mean, in 2 years, that might seem crazy, but I don't know which way is crazier. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's because Braylon Allen is ahead and he was only at RB 53, or is it because J.K. Dobbins is a starter in LA? There's just a lot of questions. But yeah, Josh, what do you have on that?
Yeah, I was very high on Audric Estime. For one, I know you're a Michigan fan. I'm a Notre Dame fan. I've been my whole life. I would trade Braylon Allen for Estime plus in a heartbeat. I was asking people throughout the process when they're talking about Braylon Allen. I was like, what does Braylon Allen, like, what does he do that Estime can't do even better? And he's just as young. He's only 4 or 5 months older than Braylon Allen. So they're both, I think, 2021. Both have a lot of value. And next year, Estime could have that backfield. Just Javante's last year. Sean Payton didn't draft Javante. He drafted Estime. And I really like Blake Watson there also. So I think Javante will be on a different team, and getting someone like Estime and just sitting on him for this year, not expecting too much, it could pay off. And then you get something on top.
Love that. Estimate RB58 in current ADP. So before we move on from running backs, Scott, was there anything else you wanted to hit on or any other players you wanted to talk about in a good or bad light before we give up the running backs and kind of just say good luck out there as we head into the season?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Estime because I was gonna say pretty much that whole backfield. As much as I love Javonte, I think he may be done there regardless of how well he does this season. I mean, if he does well, they're probably not gonna pay him, and if he doesn't do well, they're gonna replace him. So I think either way, he's pretty much gone. So Estime, and then also Blake Watson, Jaleel McLaughlin, all those guys. They've all had pretty good camps, and I know some of them are banged up, but I'm keeping an eye on all those guys. I have a bunch of shares of all of them, and we'll see what shakes out. But I mean, I expect Pirine probably to be gone. If Estime's pass pro can be up to snuff, then I think they'll get rid of Pirine just to save that money, and then by next year, definitely Pirine and Javonte should both be gone. So it doesn't mean they don't draft somebody or sign somebody else, but I think all those guys have good enough talent, good enough skill sets to have a role, and definitely in a Sean Payton offense, he's going to use two backs, and he's going to get the most out of them. So all of those guys, I'm definitely in on. Ambiguous backfields, find the cheapest guy, roster him, and see what happens.
Yeah, I think honestly, like all of those Denver running backs are going well below where they could go. And I'm not saying where they should go, but where they could go. And we could be looking at something very different even as soon as a month from now when the season starts and we see, oh my gosh, Jaleel McLaughlin is the number one. And I didn't know that. Or like, I was thinking he'd be the RB3. Like, you're exactly right. Like, those are the exact kind of lottery tickets I want. Running back is where I tend to take the most lottery tickets, like we mentioned before. So the logic here, if I'm going to put all of this advice into some sort of nutshell, get as many of these guys as you can, even if you feel like they're overvalued. Maybe now might be the time to split that asset up into multiple undervalued ascending assets, but just kind of ride the wave when it comes to tight end and running back. Because in all honesty, if your team is hinging on having the right running back, you're probably not really contending anyway, right? Like, you probably are a couple of players, I should say, away from actually contending. So let's be serious with this. That being said, I think that's going to wrap us up for RB prep for the night. Hopefully you guys got some good out of this. I think we covered a lot of good names on this list. Again, we could just rattle off 89 names and be like everybody else. I don't think we want to do that. So hopefully you got some good value out of that as we head into our final and favorite segment of the night, because we didn't have any trades this week. Thank God. Here we go into the final trade segment of the night by our friend Brian Hart.
Find me a trade.
Thank you, Brian. I will find us a trade. So I'm going to read the settings and everything. I've got the roster up. Scott, are you able to help me with the description, I guess, or the manager comments at least? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, either one.
So I'll start this out. It's submitted by Jeffrey Jacobs at Alpha Male JMJ on Twitter. The league is Dayman on Fight Milk. That took me a minute, but I like that one. He's got that fight milk.
It's always sunny, I think.
Yep, very much always sunny. And then the team name is Dylan, you son of a bitch, which I believe is from Predator. Again, great movie, classic 80s. Maybe I'm wrong. Correct me. Feel free to send me a DM or tweet at me if I'm terrible, or if you're puff pass in the chat and I'm way off, tell me that. But Dylan, you son of a bitch, just feels like a Predator quote, if I could recall. So anyway, this team is a 12-team Superflex, 1 PPR for running back and receiver, an extra half PPR for tight end. It's a start 10, 1 QB, 2 running back, 2 receiver, 2 tight end. That's the wrinkle here. 2 flex and a super flex. So this is one of those. I have actually got a couple of these leagues that start 2 tight ends. It's kind of a 2, like just 2 across everything, because you count super flex as a quarterback most of the time. But 2 tight end leagues add an extra special flavor to them. But Scott, if you wouldn't mind reading the manager comments, which aren't very long, I'll then get into the roster. I'm not going to bring it up just because it's going to make my computer crash. But go ahead and read the comments, and then I'll do the roster.
Yep, that's fine. So, yeah, he just took over this orphan, and the idea is to go for the 101. He also mentions that the league is low, medium activity.
Now, as small as that is, there's a ton of terrific info in there, right? First things first, it's an orphan. He has no attachment to any of these players. In terms of trades, that's what I like to hear. He's going for the 101. Okay, well, that means he's trying to rebuild. He's trying to pivot into like, hey, this isn't my team. I want to kill it. I want to go to the ground, take it to the studs. And then low to medium activity. I love when people tell me how active leagues are, because that dictates a lot for me about how much of a trade I can get. If it's an active league, now, Scott, again, I know you're in a ton of leagues, and I'm sure you're in a ton of active and inactive leagues. So am I. Trade addicts, for instance, I can usually send a trade, get an offer counter, and it doesn't go anywhere within a day. But if it's an inactive league, I have leagues that I'm in right now where I send offers and it's crickets for 3 weeks. Like I get no counter, I get nothing. So that actually helps me out too. So I think it's very interesting, very to the point, and I love it, Jeff. Thank you for giving us all the info we needed in 3 very short phrases. So his team is, I would say, it's good. Not great. It's definitely not contending. I don't
For
think
an orphan, it's not terrible.
I was going to say it is. It's better than most orphans I've seen or been asked to take over.
Yeah.
Quarterback, he's got Kyler Murray, and then kind of the ghost of Kenny Pickett, Jacoby Brissett, Joe Flacco, Jake Browning. Like it's Murray and the boys. I don't hate it though, especially as an orphan. I get the logic with the last year. Running back, we've got Nick Chubb, of course, who was hurt. Khalil Herbert, who didn't do much. Chase Brown, who kind of underperformed a little bit. Not really, but kind of. You've got Blake Watson, Deneric Prince, Rasheen Ali, a bunch of other guys that we just talked about, right? So like Deonta Foreman, Sean Tucker, like there's some guys on there that you're just like hoping to catch lightning in a bottle. The one thing I will say as we're here, he has more running backs than anybody else in the league, which again, perfect timing for our running back prep, but also exactly where I want to be with a team like this. If you're rebuilding, those are the guys you get because they're spikes, and I like it. Receiver, he's got Rome Odunze, which I'm guessing he got in this year's draft, Brandon Ayuk, Stephon Diggs, Javon Baker, Tyler Lockett, Deontay Johnson, Greg Dortch, Andre Yoshevich. Like there are some good nuggets in there, but definitely some pieces to move. And then tight end is a landscape that I do not want to have. It is Eric All, Davis Allen, Josh Wiley, and Tanner McLaughlin. Just no tight ends to speak of. Yeah, but draft picks, he's got 2 firsts, obviously his own, and AL221s. He's got 2 seconds, including his own and another one, and then a 5th. So he's only got 2 firsts, 2 seconds. 26, he's got two 26 firsts, a second, a 4th, and a 5th, and 26, and then a full battery in 27. So he's got a pretty fair amount of draft picks, but this team doesn't look like it's balanced. I can see why it's orphaned, right? That's kind of where I go with this. Like I get why this was an orphan. I don't know what trades were made since he submitted and now, but just looking at this, it feels to me like, yeah, whoever did this was like, I done messed up and I got to get out of here. So, Scott, why don't we go to your trade first and you can kind of talk through your thoughts and then we'll go to you, Josh, on yours next.
Yeah, I'm curious how he got the same team's 25 and 26 first. Like, what was that one big trade? Was that one player? Right? Like, what happened there? I want to know. Damn it.
With you.
Okay. So, all right. It's only a 0.5 premium on the tight end, but it's start 2. So we're going to treat that as basically a full double premium.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like if it's 2 tight end, I look at that as like a 2.0 premium, right? It's the same kind of thing to me. Yeah,
exactly. Yep. So definitely heavy on tight end there. You're almost always going to be at a disadvantage at one spot, if not both, and he's at a huge disadvantage at both right there. So that hurts. Yeah, I mean,
and 20%
really. 20% of your lineup, and then before we even get into other positions, but then we go to super flex.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're already down 3 spots before we even look at running backs and receivers. I mean, so the obvious play right now is for TJ Hawkinson, in my opinion, because he's coming off the injury. He's going to slow start. He just lost his potential upside quarterback. That just Hawkinson's the guy that everybody's trying to trade for who's rebuilding, especially in a tight end premium league. It makes a lot of sense. Now, the team that has him also has his quarterback, JJ. So you think, well, he may not want to break up the stack, but honestly, that team, I cannot figure it out. They have a strange roster build. They have players all over the place. I don't know that manager knows what they're doing. So,
well, just real quick, let's just. I think we want to clarify this for those listening because it is a wild team to me. Quarterback. This is for D Williams 90. Quarterback. He's got Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, Mac Jones, JJ McCarthy, and Hendon Hooker. So it's like a lot of those guys in the bottom 20, like, oh, okay, I see where you're going. And just because you mentioned it, tight end, he's got TJ Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts, Isaiah Likely, Juwan Johnson, who kind of has some value, but not really in Dynasty. And then Jonnu Smith. Receiver, he's got Jamar Chase. Love that. but then it falls off a freaking cliff. You got Cortland Sutton, Roman Wilson, Calvin Ridley. Like, it's just studs and duds.
Like
and
old
then at
guys,
running back,
young guys.
yeah. Like I don't know what I don't know what
are you doing?
What do I do with my hands? I'm with
Yeah.
you. And then at running back, he's got Zach Charbonnet, Brian Robinson, who we mentioned earlier, Bucky Irvin, who we talked about, James Conner, J.K. Dobbins. Like a lot of good running backs. Travis Etienne, I missed that one. So like a lot of good players and options there. But like I'm with you, Scott. What is this team? Like which direction are we going here? I don't know if he's contending with that roster, but
like he may have felt like he was with JJ, and now maybe he doesn't. So maybe you could pull off like a little. Maybe you can go after both guys. You know, I don't know. It's you have picks. You could, if you felt that strongly about it, maybe you go after both JJ and Hawk. You know,
what would it take though? What would you send for JJ and Hawk in this? Because obviously, like your point is valid. Like you need a tight end, and that stack is nice, and Hawk is injured, and JJ's a little up in the air. But like, do you think picks alone will get this done?
I mean, I don't know what that guy's
it's
doing.
not a bad idea to
So
offer.
at this
right?
point,
I
would offer anything. He to me has no clear strategy or roster build. So I would offer based on that. So yeah, I mean, I'd like to offer a quarterback, but there isn't really one unless you could give him Brissett, because Brissett might be starting, like, which is the direction I end up going. But
I know.
But yeah, so I mean, I would maybe try something like that plus the firsts. I mean, you could look at where you think your first is going to be. I mean, the 101 next year, I'd rather have JJ and Hawk than the 101 next year. So in this league, especially if you keep your receiver core intact. But that if you want the 101, you can't do that. So you're gonna have to make some decisions.
Well, real quick to interject this too. Like again, think about it. This league, and you can tell this from the draft picks, not a lot of trading.
Yeah,
right? Like a lot of the picks are on the teams, and so this is where like. And again, I get a lot of, I'm sure you do too, Scott, but like a lot, and maybe even you too, Josh, but like a lot of people DM me and they're like, I can't get this trade done. I'm like, you might have to overpay to make a move, right? Like you might have to lose a trade to win the league. And I think sometimes that's really hard for people that are tuned in and dialed in and are junkies like us, and they don't want to lose a trade. It's like, no, sometimes it's okay to give up the battle to win the war, right? And so that's where some of these trades, when I'm looking at these rosters, you only see like 4 teams have other teams' picks. That's a little odd,
It's one of two things. Either they value the picks too highly, or they don't know how to value the picks.
Exactly.
So if it's like a home league, they probably don't know how to value the picks.
Yep.
If it's not, they just may value them too highly, which in this case would work in your favor. So depending on that scenario, you can, look into this. If not, then I would, I want to give you some actionable thing to try here. So basically, I mean, some of those running backs you have on your roster are guys that can pop, and then you'd be able to move them. So I think that's a good group to have. And then you're going to have to maneuver off your wide receivers in some way.
Unfortunately, yes.
So Steelers num 1 is a team that, there's a lot of options, honestly, because he has the kind of receiver core that I would want you to have. And, his starting lineup could be pretty good, pretty competitive, but his overall roster, he doesn't have it's very fragile. So, I mean, it's, one injury and he may be toast. So adding some of those guys, maybe he also has Drake May. So that's where I would add in the Brissett as kind of the kicker for him to secure that second starting
he's also
quarterback.
Got Malik Willis, Dorian Thompson Robinson. Like those are guys. And he's got extra roster spots.
That's what I mean. So you can not only can you go with the 3 for 2 or 2 for 1 type deal. That team is the perfect partner for that. I would personally try to move on from Diggs or Deontay, just based on age. So if you offered maybe Diggs, I don't know if you can do Diggs and Brissett for Nico. I don't know, the 2 Texans receivers. I don't know if that would work. Maybe Deontay and Brissett for Nico. Or you could just go after one of the young guys, Reed, Thomas, Polk. So take Deontay and Brissett and a third for Reed in a second, something like that. You're trying to get younger. You're maybe trying to not score as many points this year if your goal is the 101, and then try to upgrade those picks or pick up additional seconds that are a lot easier to acquire than first, especially in a league that doesn't trade them. So I think there's a lot of different options you can go there, but ideally, with that team in particular, I think adding Brissett would be something that team would be interested in, having May and not having a true second quarterback. To make them a little bit more competitive for this season, and then go after your pick of whichever receiver you prefer by moving off some of those older receivers on your roster.
I like that too. And like doing something, even if you have to add like a Isaiah Davis to that trade.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Like who cares?
Always
just add
throw
a
those
little
guys
piece because this guy's got open roster spots. You can easily do a 3-for-1 and consolidate a little bit. I think that's a good move. I think too, though, when I'm looking at teams and we do this FMAT all the time, right? This is, we do this constantly on the show. And the thing that I always look at when I'm debating if somebody's a contender is like, well, who are your running backs? Like we just talked about running backs, right? This team, Steelers #1, has Jonathan Taylor, Devon Chan, and Bijan Robinson.
Exactly.
That's a contender. I mean, even if you only have to start 2, that's a contender to me. And he's
those
weak
are actually his
QB2.
only running backs.
Correct. And Justice Hill, but that's it. Like that's exactly it. Like he doesn't have anything else. So and he's weak at quarterback 2 and he's weak at tight end 2. Well, your team doesn't have any tight ends to help. Let's just be honest. Like none of those guys care. None of those guys are going to matter. But you're exactly right about a Jacoby Brissett. Even if you have to throw in a Kenny Pickett and just sell the shit out of Kenny Pickett and be like, maybe he's the guy. Like I don't mind that logic to get a guy on your team, like a receiver that might be there next year for you to matter. So I really like where your head was at on this. And I think, again, if you have to add a couple of pieces, so be it. Who cares? Make the guy feel like he stole you, got the trade of the century, whatever it happens to be. But Josh, what do you think about this trade in general? And then if you're ready, go into yours if you have one.
No, I like what he said. You're really trying to shed points if you're going for the 101.
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be too many there from the running backs on this team. So once they spike, get what you can for them. But yeah, as much as I love Brandon Ayuk, you don't really want him accruing a bunch of points. Deontay, Diggs, Lockett, those should be guys that are pretty easy to get rid of. I would try and hang on to Rome. He'd be someone you could build around.
Yes, I agree.
Agreed.
But as far as my trade, I saw one match up pretty well, especially in a 2 tight end league. It's with Savage Dynasty. He has decent receivers, but he doesn't have much depth. Yeah. And it looks like he's traded his 2nd round pick. So I think you could maybe pair up. You got 2 options here. You could maybe pair up Deontay Johnson and Stephon Diggs. Try and get that 26 first. That might could work. You might have to add some other stuff in, like you said. Make it feel like they really won the deal. The other one is you could try and get Pat Freiermuth at a discount. Maybe trade Diggs for Freiermuth and a 3rd.
Oh, yeah.
I would normally say you could get a 2nd, but in a 2 tight end league,
2 tight ends,
there's a little bit more
tough.
of a premium. So you might have to get a 3rd. Like I said, you could always throw in some of these other little pieces too. But I say go get him at good value. He needs wide receiver depth, and he has really good tight end depth. So that's
the main
one I would go after.
Those are 2 really good bones of trades, and that's actually what we like a lot on this show is finding good starting points. Because let's say the person, Jeff, we're talking to here, he doesn't really like Freiermuth, but he really likes Dallas Goedert. He's higher on him. Pivot to Goddard then. This guy, Savage Dynasty, is Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert, and Pat Freiermuth, along with, to be honest, Tyler Conklin and Daniel Bellinger. Like he's got enough depth at tight end to be able to sacrifice one of those guys. He might be willing to get another receiver because, again, you do have to start 2 of them. He's got more tight ends. So I really like the build of that. But Scott, what were your thoughts on that trade? I guess. I mean, I think we're on the same page. That all sounds great, right?
Yeah, huge. Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you said there. Definitely, wherever you can get that tight end, you're gonna have to. So even taking shots on guys like a Bellinger or a Musgrave or somebody that maybe isn't quite up to the value they should be right now. But Freiermuth is a great example of getting an potentially undervalued tight end.
No, I like that.
And he's still 25, and he's 25, and in an Arthur Smith offense where they just funnel targets through the tight ends, I think he's a really good value for Dynasty right now.
Yeah,
well, I know it was 2 weeks ago. I talked a lot about Pat Freiermuth with Bob Lung, who was on the show, because for a lot of reasons, I'm trying to get a tight end in that league that we had together. We ended up making a deal, and I'm a big Freiermuth fan. I think there's a lot of negative talk on him because of that Arthur Smith connection. I think I talked about this a lot at the Expo even last week. Like there's a lot of people out there that are just down on Freiermuth because of that Arthur Smith connection. Guys, he's not the head coach. Mike Tomlin is there. It's not going to be the exact same thing. Like you think Mike Tomlin is just going to be like, hey, you were terrible over there. Come on in and be terrible here. No, he's going to put guardrails up. And I think the usage of Pitts was mostly because of Arthur Smith. I don't think that translates to an offense with Mike Tomlin, who they just got rid of Matt Canada, who didn't use Freiermuth enough. That was the whole reason he got let go. So don't let that narrative sway you away from Pat Freiermuth. I love that. I like a lot of those options you're talking about there, Josh. So mine was in the same vein, where this team, even if you're not contending, even if you're going for the 101, I want to pivot some points from receiver, if I can, to tight end, because you have two of them. You need to get somebody that at least you can put in a spot. Tight ends are going to be overvalued. I don't know if it gets done straight up, but part of my logic here was if I can send Ayuk, who's currently a 49er, and get Kittle, who is currently a 49er, I'm happy to do that, right? So the twist is here. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if the person who has Kittle is going to say enough to that. Now, I've done this. I've made this kind of trade in other leagues, right? So that was the first place my brain went when I saw Ayuk on this roster. And I was like, well, all right, who's got Kittle? Let's find Kittle. Well, it's AJE221, who obviously is already making trades. Jeff has two of this guy's picks. So these guys have made trades before. I'm willing to bet. If it's a low volume league, these guys have made trades before. That to me says, hey, AJE221 is someone I've traded with before. He's got Kittle. I have Ayuk. Maybe I can make this work. Let's see the context. What other tight ends does he have in a 2 tight end league? Well, guess what? AJE221 has Travis Kelce, Dalton Schultz, Noah Fant, Luke Musgrave, and Chigozie Okonkwo. Honestly, as much as you want to hate Chig, that guy is most likely going to be somebody you could plug in if you had to. He's got 6 possible starting tight ends in a 2 tight end league. He has got the most tight end depth of anyone in this league, in my opinion. Now, granted, there are some other teams that are very heavy. You mentioned Savage Dynasty has a lot. I know Ron Ford Diggity, I love that name, has a lot. Like there are some other teams that do, but then there are teams like this one, like Jeff's, nothing, right? Like it's all or nothing. I want to get at least one tight end on my roster. So I'm trying to send Ayuk to AJE221 in exchange for Kittle. And I might play the angle like he might still get traded. Like this is maybe the best time to get him. His price is going to go up if he goes to Pittsburgh. All these other question marks, right? Like there's a lot of things that you could sell on Ayuk that I think might make this work. And Kittle being a little bit down, let's even say he stays. Well, then Kittle's less valuable because Ayuk is the number 1 there and Kittle doesn't get a boost. So my logic is sell the shit out of this. And if you got to add somebody, add somebody. Add 2 somebodies. Add 3 running backs. I don't give a crap what it takes. Make some sort of move to get at least a tight end on your roster. At the same time, if you prefer Dalton Schultz or Luke Musgrave even, and can get something else on top of them for Ayuk, I'm fine doing that. But I think if you trade players on the same team, it ends up being a little bit easier to negotiate to be like, hey, you're getting rid of 149er, you're getting another. Like we're just swapping players on the same team. Like, but then there's some upside with Ayuk. So again, that was all of the logic I went into to be like, hey, maybe this guy will work. There's a lot of options. There's a lot of ideas. Josh, what do you think about that as a basic idea for a trade or bones? And then which would you rather have maybe, I guess, in terms of points?
Out of the ones I would honestly probably shoot for, and I think I'll start by saying this. I think George Kittle is pound for pound the best tight end all around in the NFL. Maybe not for fantasy, just, given the inconsistency, but he's also 30 years old. So I might try and shoot for the Schultz, who's a little bit younger, even though it is a crowded offense. Not sure how long Diggs is going to be there. He's still going to get targets. I might try and shoot for Schultz plus something on top instead. But I like the idea, because especially it being a 2 tight end league. We want to go ahead and get something there and get rid of Ayuk.
Even if it's like 1.5 tight end premium, like I want a tight end 20 anyway. But then when you start 2 tight ends, tight end 20 is super valuable. Yep. And I would much rather have 2 guys in the 20 to 30 range than one of the guys at the top. But at the same time, if I can go get Kittle for an Ayuk and just get out of that receiver, you've got a lot of question marks at receiver. And Odunze is the only one I really want next year, right? So I think Ayuk now might be the best chance you have. With Diggs and Deontay, I want both of them to score points before I trade them, just because I just feel like that's when you're going to get the most value. That being said, I feel like if you can get more than Kittle in this league, go for it. Like I'm kind of selling low a little, but DTC has it even without that 2 tight ends starting, because that's kind of a wonky one. But also, like, I think you can, if you have to add some, who cares? Like add Yoshevich to that, whatever you want. Like What do you want on top of Ayuk for Kittle? Name the price. Now, if he names Rome, of course you're wrong. But name a small piece and I'll do it. But Scott, what do you think about that before we call it a night and get out of here tonight?
Yep, I'm on the same page. That's it. It all makes sense. You're trying to, you're always trying to buy low, but you got to go after those premium positions. And when you're starting to, definitely got to get some tight ends in there. You're going to have to take some shots, and it's really the only way to turn this thing around. So you gotta go for it. Player takes aren't the easiest way to do it, but you got to try.
Exactly. All right. Well, we had another. I wanted to make sure I mentioned this comment in the chat. We had Andrew Big Disco in the chat. Jamar Chase, no matter what. We've talked about this before, and in Dynasty, go get Jamar Chase. He's giving me some crap because Jamar Chase hasn't signed his deal yet, and he's a little nervous. I am too. Don't start me on it. I'm a Bengals fan. But I did get to see Disco at the Expo last week. That was great. He is much taller than I expected in person, so that was really cool. That being said, I think we've done a pretty good job for you here tonight, Jeff. I think we've given you some good ideas of good places to start. Definitely hit us up in the DMs, tag us on Twitter, hit us up anywhere you can. We want to help with this. We want to see a deal get done in a league, especially like this, that is low to medium activity. I love seeing trades happen in leagues where trades don't happen. So whatever we can do to make this done and make this deal get done, I guess, again, if you have to oversell a little bit, I think we're all agreeing. We're fine with that. I think make the move, go get a tight end. I think all of us are on that same page. And I think, too, you've got the right build for an orphan. I really like this as an orphan. And I think, too, that if you end up going for the 101, you got to shed some points. And you might just have to wait for injuries. And I've done that before, too. And just saying, well, who got hurt? That's who I want. And I just go get those guys that get hurt and get patience. You're exactly right, Scott. It's going to be rough. It's going to be tough. It's going to be weird setting lineups where you click the button on Jake Browning, even though he's not starting. I've been there. Those are weird weeks. But if you play the long game and you take your time, this team can be a dominant team as soon as next year. You've already got 2 firsts. And if one of them is your own and you are terrible, you could pivot that to 3 other firsts. You could easily rebuild this within a year or 2 with the way you have this roster. Kyler, even, to be honest, Kyler is somebody I'd be willing to move if I had to. Not right away. I want to kind of see what I got, because if he's somebody that I like, I want to hold on to that. But you could build this roster around Kyler, Rome, maybe even any tight end you want, really, because it's 2 tight end. And then you could pick somebody like a Chase Brown or a Sion Vaki, one of those guys, some of those guys that just blow up this year. One of those guys hits and you're good at running back. All you need is a couple of pieces. So don't freak out. Don't panic. And definitely don't buy high. Buy low. Sell high. But you're not in a mood to buy high. Get the discount bin you can. Go churn that roster. If somebody gets hurt, use that IR spot. That's exactly the way you get out of this. So before we get out of here tonight, Josh, I want people to get another chance to hear where you're from, what you do, and kind of what's going on in your world and where people can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Rotonaut. That's ROTONAUT. I really haven't been tweeting much during the summer. Things kind of slowed down. But I will be ramping up activity. I just updated my Dynasty rankings this morning. And you can find all of my rankings at goingfor2.com. And on Saturday nights at 7:30, Brian Ford and I do a Dynasty Saturday Night 5, where we do a list of 5 topics to talk about. That's at 7:30 on the Going for 2 YouTube channel. I think that's about it. Thanks for having me on. I had a lot of fun doing this.
No, thank you so much for coming on. Again, I hadn't really heard you much anywhere else, but I love Going for 2. And again, as we're co-owners, I felt like let's go out there and talk about it a little bit and see what's going on. Anything we can do for charity. I'm in way too many charity leagues this year. I said no to a lot last year, and I felt bad. I couldn't say no again. So I said yes to all the ones I said no to like an idiot. Even said yes to some I said yes to last year. So it's all for fun. That being said, we're going to pitch it over to the one and only Scott Sidlow to kind of kick us out of here tonight.
All right. Well, I have one thing really quick because I got to get this thing filled. Justin Rogers, our friend over at Dynasty Hot Sauce, we have auction league that we run together, and we had a couple guys leave, and we need to fill this thing up and get it rolling here before the season starts. So if anybody's interested, hit me up. It's MFL, it's auction, it's fun. We've got grab an orphan. We'll do a dispersal, whatever it takes. Let's just get it done. There's a lot of good people in there. Names you would know.
When you tweeted it out, right? Like, I
So
remember you mentioned it.
yeah, it's in. You can find it, or just hit me up and I'll get you details. But good people. So let's make it happen. Yeah, and then thanks to Jeff Jacobs for the find me a trade. Appreciate that. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Special thanks to Josh for joining us tonight, and special thanks to Rocky and
Tommy
and especially Andrew for holding things down over the summer. So really looking forward to this fall and having a great football season, helping you guys out, making a lot of good moves and winning a lot of leagues. So let's make it happen. For Josh, for Andrew, I'm Scott Sidlow. Junkies out.